Somewhere in the archives of Minas Tirith, there is a scroll written by a dead king, sitting untouched for nearly 3,000 years. Nobody reads it, nobody thinks to. And the entire war against Sauron very nearly gets lost, because two of the wisest men in Middle-earth spend 16 years hunting through swamps and forests for a creature when the answer was sitting in a library the entire time. That is the real story of the hunt for Gollum, not the one you think you know. Ask anyone who has read the appendices, and they will tell you the same clean version. Gandalf grew suspicious of Bilbo's ring. He sent Aragorn to track down Gollum. After years of searching, Aragorn found him, dragged him back, and the truth about the One Ring was finally confirmed. A triumph, a testament to patience and skill. Two legendary figures, doing what legendary figures do. That version is not false. It is just incomplete in the most important way possible, because it treats the outcome as proof of the method, as if 16 years of searching obviously worked, so it must have been the right 16 years. Read what Tolkien actually wrote, in Gandalf's own words, in Aragorn's own words, and a very different story emerges. One about two men who kept giving up, who trusted the wrong person, who got lucky at the exact moment they had stopped trying, and who, in the end, found the real answer somewhere Gollum was never involved in at all. Start with Gandalf, because his part of this story begins with a hesitation nobody talks about. The shadow falls on his heart the moment he learns how Bilbo actually won the ring back before the Battle of Five Armies, decades before anyone else even suspects anything is wrong. Gandalf feels it immediately, and then he does almost nothing about it for 17 years. Not because he forgets, because he is afraid. He says so himself, later, to Frodo, that in all the long wars with the Dark Tower, treason had ever been the greatest enemy, and he kept his fears quiet rather than risk being wrong, or worse, being right in a way that put everyone he loved in danger. 17 years of watching Bilbo stay unnaturally young, of noticing the strange grip the ring seemed to have whenever it came up in conversation. And still, Gandalf waits. The answer was never in the swamp. Hold on to that line, because you are about to watch two extremely capable men walk right past the real answer for over a decade, chasing something that was never going to give it to them. When Gandalf finally acts, in the year 3001, it is not because he has solved anything. It is because Bilbo's behavior at his own birthday party has frightened him badly enough to finally move. He brings Aragorn into his suspicion. Together they decide the fastest way to learn the truth is to find the one living creature who might know where this ring actually came from. Gollum, who carried it for centuries before Bilbo ever touched it. And here is where the popular telling usually skips something important. Gandalf does not commit to this hunt with total conviction. He drops it, multiple times. He tells Frodo plainly, years later, that in the middle of the search he had much else to think of, and that in the end, he trusted the lore of Saruman instead of continuing to dig for himself. Saruman, the wisest of the White Council, the head of Gandalf's own order, tells him the One Ring was almost certainly washed down the Anduin and lost to the sea centuries ago. Gandalf accepts this, not because he has verified it, but because it comes from someone he has spent his entire long life trusting completely. He says it directly, later, with something close to shame. He paid for that trust, with many dark and dangerous days. Think about what that actually means. The single greatest error in this entire 16-year search is not a failure of tracking skill or patience. It is Gandalf believing the wrong authority figure, at the exact moment believing the right thing mattered most. This is not the story of a wizard being clever. This is the story of a wizard being human enough to trust his oldest friend over his own gut instinct and nearly losing everything because of it. Aragorn's half of the story is no cleaner. He takes up the search because of something older than Gandalf's fear, something closer to inheritance. In his own words at the Council of Elrond, he says it was fitting that Isildur's heir should labor to repair Isildur's fault. That single sentence carries more weight than the entire rest of the journey. Aragorn is not simply helping a friend. He is trying to personally settle a debt that is not even his, a mistake his ancestor made 3,000 years before he was born, when Isildur chose not to destroy the ring at Mount Doom. That is an enormous thing to carry into a swamp. For years, Aragorn and Gandalf search together, and separately, across the entirety of Wilderland through Mirkwood, along the Anduin, down to the very fences of Mordor, and find almost nothing solid. Rumors. Old tracks gone cold. a trail that leads to the edge of Mordor and simply stops. In 3007, Aragorn gives up entirely and goes home to see his mother one last time before she dies. Gandalf, around the same period, also steps back from the hunt for years. Two of the most capable men in Middle-earth, repeatedly walking away from the same search. This is the part worth sitting with, because it complicates the image most people carry of both characters. Gandalf is supposed to be the ancient, all-seeing wizard. Aragorn is supposed to be the quietly determined king-in-waiting, patient beyond ordinary men. And yet here they are, across more than a decade, both of them exhausted, both of them discouraged, both of them choosing more than once to stop. That is not a flaw in the writing. That is Tolkien showing you something most adaptations quietly erase. Even the wise get tired. Even the noble give up sometimes. What makes them who they are is not that they never stopped. It is that they eventually started again. They resumed the search in 3009, and for 8 more years, essentially nothing changes. Gandalf turns his attention elsewhere for a time. Aragorn keeps walking, alone, through some of the most dangerous ground in Middle-earth, within sight of the Black Gate itself, treading, in his own words, the deadly flowers of the Morgul Vale. And still, no Gollum. Meanwhile, in the background of all this searching, Gollum has already been caught not by Aragorn, but by Sauron himself, tortured in the pits of Barad-dûr for information he barely has, until the only words that matter slip out of him: Baggins, Shire. Sauron already knows what Gandalf and Aragorn are still years away from confirming, and he lets Gollum go on purpose, hoping his hatred for the ones who robbed him will lead him straight back to the ring and straight into Sauron's watching eyes. So while two heroes are chasing a creature to learn a truth, the enemy already possesses part of that truth, and is using the same creature as a leash back to the prize. Now here is the moment that should genuinely surprise you, if you have only ever heard the clean version of this story. Aragorn does not find Gollum through skill. He finds him because he has already quit. His own words, he had despaired at last, and had begun his journey home. And it is only then, walking away from the search, that he stumbles onto fresh tracks beside a stagnant pool at the edge of the dead marshes. Not weeks of careful deduction closing in on a target. A man giving up, and luck intervening anyway. He catches Gollum that same evening covered in slime, biting, furious, and the 16-year hunt technically ends. But notice what actually happens next, because it undercuts the triumph almost immediately. Aragorn does not get any real information out of him. In his own account, nothing came from Gollum's mouth except the marks of his teeth. The creature everyone spent 16 years chasing gives Aragorn nothing usable at all. What follows is 50 brutal days hauling an unwilling, starving, biting prisoner 900 miles across some of the deadliest territory in Middle-earth, ending at Thranduil's halls in Mirkwood, where Gollum is finally imprisoned. Aragorn calls it, of everything he endured in years of searching, the worst part of the entire ordeal. And while all of this is happening, the swamp, the capture, the 900 miles Gandalf, is somewhere else entirely, doing something far less dramatic and far more important. He is in Minas Tirith, in the archives, reading a scroll written by Isildur himself, describing markings on the ring that fire alone could reveal. The answer was never in the swamp. This is the detail almost nobody sits with long enough. Gandalf finds the actual proof, the thing that will let him confirm, beyond doubt, that Bilbo's ring is the one ring in a library, not from a captured creature in a dungeon. Gollum's testimony, when Gandalf finally does question him days later in Mirkwood, mostly confirms what the scroll had already all but proven. The desperate, 16-year, 900-mile hunt for Gollum was not what saved Middle-earth from walking into disaster blind. A dead king's forgotten handwriting did that. Gollum gave them one piece of information the scroll could not, that Sauron already knew the words Baggins and Shire. That detail alone justifies the entire hunt in hindsight, because without it, Gandalf might not have understood the urgency, might not have raced back to the Shire in time. But it is worth being honest about the shape of this story, rather than the legend of it. The wise men did not track down the missing piece of a puzzle. They got lucky twice, once with a forgotten scroll, and once with a creature, caught by accident, on the way home from defeat. And then, almost as if the story wants to underline its own point, all of it nearly comes undone within weeks. Orcs strike Thranduil's realm, and in the chaos, Gollum escapes. 16 years, 900 miles, 50 days of exhausting captivity, and Gollum is free again, almost as soon as he is caught, right back on Sauron's side of the board, right back into the story that is about to unfold at Mount Doom. So what was the hunt for Gollum, really? Not the clean triumph of two legendary heroes outsmarting a hidden enemy. It was a long, uneven, repeatedly abandoned search, driven as much by guilt and fear as by wisdom. Gandalf trusting the wrong friend, Aragorn trying to settle a debt that was never his to pay, both of them quitting more than once, both of them finding what they needed almost by accident, in places and ways that had very little to do with skill. And maybe that is exactly why it matters. Because a story about two flawless heroes methodically solving a mystery is not actually that interesting. A story about two exhausted, doubting, occasionally wrong men who kept coming back to an impossible task anyway, even after giving up on it more than once. That is a story about what it actually costs to do the right thing. When you are not certain, when your best information turns out to be wrong, and when the answer you desperately need might be sitting in a place you never thought to look. If you had spent 16 years chasing something, quit twice, and finally stumbled onto it purely by accident the moment you stopped trying, would you call that a victory? Sit with that for a second, because Tolkien clearly wanted you to. This channel exists to dig up exactly this kind of story, the ones flattened into a single triumphant sentence in every retelling, when the real version is messier, more human, and far more worth knowing. If that is what you are here for, stay a while. The scroll is still there, somewhere in the memory of that story, sitting quietly in an archive nobody thought to check for 17 years. Not a sword, not a chase through the marshes. A forgotten piece of handwriting, waiting the entire time to be read. The answer was never in the swamp. It never was.